Let's go. Well, hi ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our week 3 tutorial here on our 2025 Chronological Bible in a Year reading challenge. If you are following us live and engaging in the community, watching these videos as they come out, then you'll notice, maybe, that it is Valentine's Day weekend, which coincidentally coincides, can you believe it, with the 15-year anniversary of this little gem coming out, my first book, He Qualifies You, launched on Valentine's Day 2010 after 15 years, and a book that is still doing well. Every now and again when I order my own copies of that for conferences or churches I may be invited to speak at, I just love seeing current and updated reviews there on Amazon. So it's such a blessing to know that He Qualifies You is still reaching people around the world, and many of you I know have read it. If you haven't, get a copy. Great weekend to do that here on the 15th anniversary. And of course, He Qualifies You, for those who don't know, is a book about covenant, beginning with the covenant of Abraham. So there's a segue. Here we go. We're continuing reading on in our Abraham story this week as we continue on in the book of Genesis. Oh, by the way, this is my new kitchen. If you want some explanation in the background, welcome to our home. We are doing a little bit of reno work here. All right. This week we've got 21 chapters in the book of Genesis, literally chapter 21 through to 41. And these chapters essentially provide the backstory to the founding fathers of God's covenant family. Okay, so the main narrative point of Genesis, maybe not the main theological point, but that's not really what we're looking at in this tutorial. The main narrative flow is the origin story of the Hebrew people or the Israelite community who end up as slaves as Egypt and then released thanks to Moses. Who are these people? Who are we? These people that Moses is bringing out. Are we just slaves? Have we only ever been slaves? No. We have a proud history. We have a legacy that goes all the way back to Adam, okay, and the stories of Noah and Enoch and those gentlemen. But most importantly, through Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, the promised land is ours because it was promised right back there generations ago to our founding fathers. And so, as we said, the book of Genesis is a book of covenant history. That's what my book's about, right? Covenant. It's about covenant history, God making a covenant with a family, with patriarchs, okay, fathers, right? So that's where the Bible story now has taken a bit of a twist or a pivot, where we've read about individuals walking with God, the age of the ancients. Now we're talking about a family that is being uniquely blessed by God, and that family, ultimately, at the end of Genesis, as we head into the next book, becomes a nation. So what we're reading this week, essentially, there's one main thing I want you to see. The main narrative intent of Genesis is to demonstrate 4 key generations that transition or that lead to Israel, the nation of Israel, from being a family, or how one man, let's say, how one man became one nation in Egypt, taken out by Moses, okay? And there are 4 key generations that each feature in our readings this week. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the boys, all right? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the boys. That really, to me, is the main narrative point of these chapters, and we see that narrative develop this week. Okay, so we've already seen the first generation, Abraham. Last week we started reading about his origin story of Abraham and Sarah, or Abram and Sarai. They begin to walk with God. God enters into a covenant relationship with them, with promises of a son and a patch of land, etc., etc. And just like Adam was taken from the dust of the earth, or dust of the ground, and God breathed on him and entered into a relationship with him and placed him in a garden, okay? So Abraham, as it were, was taken out of the nations, out of the dust of the world, okay? Taken out of the nations, God entered into a relationship with him and promised him and his descendants after him a promised land, all right? So we've started reading the story of Abraham. That is the first generation. Well, Abraham has a couple of sons, and that's where we move from Abraham to Isaac. Now, I said a couple of sons because Isaac is not the firstborn, strictly speaking. Ishmael is. And so this week we're going to read about their origin story, Isaac's origin story, the rivalry between these two brothers. We're going to read about their wives. We're going to read about their families. And while Ishmael is blessed by God and by Abraham, the covenant line, this is the important thing, the covenant line promise goes from Abraham to Isaac. Abraham, Isaac. The third generation is Jacob, whose name gets changed to Israel. We read about his story this week. He also, can you believe it, has a rivalry with his brother. In fact, he runs away from his brother for 20 years, okay? His brother Esau. So we read about that story, about Jacob. We read about him going to a foreign land, him marrying a couple of sisters, and ending up having 11 sons. By the time he comes back to his brother after 20 years, they have a 12th son whose name is Joseph. And so that's where we get the fourth generation. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the boys. And that's where essentially the book of Genesis finishes, with this fourth generation, the boys in Egypt, with brother Joe as the leader among them, because he is the firstborn of the favourite wife, and which is a theme, by the way, that you're going to see, a repeated motif that you might see this week as we read about these families, okay? So that really, to me, is the main thing I want you to notice this week. 4 generations: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the boys, and that is essentially the main narrative flow of the book of Genesis. All right, a couple of things I noticed this week that really got me thinking. I just want to flag with you and see whether this sparks your interest as you read as well. The first thing I really noticed this week that I love seeing is God's ongoing commitment to guide his people, to speak to them. Now, we've seen this all the way through the book of Genesis, God appearing to people, whatever that means, God using angels a lot. We've seen angelic interactions quite a lot in the book of Genesis so far. But one of the things I really noticed this week is the emergence of dreams, of dream language. God speaking to people through dreams. You're probably going to notice that this week. That's quite a prolific type of methodology or mechanism by which God speaks to his people. I also really noticed the developing understanding of God, of how these people view God and how God is slowly revealing himself to be. You know, God, there's this thing in the scriptures we read called progressive revelation. Okay, we know more about God at the end of the book than we did at the beginning. Okay, and that should be, in one sense, pretty obvious, but that's what we're watching as we trace this journey, is that more and more we're watching God reveal himself to people. And one of the ways he does that is through revealing names, which really got my attention this week. Last week, God revealed himself as God Most High. You remember when Melchizedek came to Abraham and said, "You're being blessed by," the Hebrew is El Elyon, God Most High. Hagar, when she encountered God, she called him El Roy, which means the God who sees. When God speaks to Abraham, he calls himself El Shaddai, the God who is more than enough, or Lord Almighty, it might sound. So God has been revealing himself by different names, but this week I noticed a few more. God calls himself the eternal God, or the everlasting God, in chapter 21. In the next chapter, he is the God who provides, when there was a ram caught in the thicket on that whole sacrificing Isaac story. In chapter 24, he's called the God of heaven and the God of earth. And what seems to be happening here is that, and catch this, is that Abraham and his family after him are developing a monotheistic view. Now, you and I take that for granted about worshipping one God, but that's not how Abraham was raised. His father was a polytheist and worshipped different gods, right? But this God, the God that's speaking to us now, the God who is leading us now, is showing us that he is the only God we need. He's the God of instant provision and the God who is in the now, and he is also the God in the distant future. He's not only the great God of heaven, he's also the great God of all the earth. And so we seem, in that theological sense, seem to be developing this idea of monotheism, which is really unique in the ancient world, okay? But one of the points about God's names, of course, is that each of them reveals something of God's character and of God's nature. And some of those are really subtle. There's this great story this week about Esau. Remember the brother that ran away, Jacob, that ran away for 20 years from his brother? When he comes back to his brother and Esau forgives him, okay, he runs out to meet him, he embraces him, falls on his neck and kisses him, okay, which should remind you of a story in the New Testament, okay? And as this happens, Jacob says, "Seeing your face, brother, is like seeing the very face of God." Wow. So Jacob now has this understanding, receiving this incredible forgiveness from his brother. He says, "You are being just like God to me." Wow. So there's a subtle way of the nature and character of God being revealed. But another major thing I noticed this week is with this relational side of God, is that God is the God of covenant family. Yes, he reveals himself after different names, but for the very first time in Scripture, we see God revealing himself as the God of Abraham. And then he says, the God of Abram and Isaac. And then he says, the God of Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, up to this point in the story, God has never introduced himself to people as the God of Noah. I am the God of Noah. He doesn't, nowhere in the Scripture is God called the God of Enoch or even the God of Adam. Okay? But now he's being referred to as the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the boys, okay? And that's the main thing I want you to see. In fact, even this week, he's called, one of his names, this is awesome, he's called the fear of Isaac is one of God's names. The point is, God is a God of covenant family, and you're going to see a lot of family dynamics this week, repeated patterns in the family. I found myself reading thinking, woof, this is like father like son, okay? There's rivalries between the brothers. There's favorite wives who have fertility issues. Okay, it's like this repeated theme. There's this constant theme of, let's say, bending the truth, okay, in this family, a bit of deceit going on, and you're like, oh, far out. You know, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, so to speak, all right? The like father, like son, you're going to see the family nature develop. And the other thing I really enjoyed this week is the real human side of their relationships. I'm not normally this way inclined, maybe it's because it's Valentine's Day weekend, maybe, but I love reading the love story, maybe not love stories, the matchmaking stories of some of these couples. You know, one of the best ways to get to know people, and we've found this moving here to Coffs Harbour in the last couple of years, is you sit with people and you go, hey, tell us your matchmaking story. How did you guys get together? If it's a couple, right? How did you guys get together? And that's part of the story here in the book of Genesis. How did these couple meet? There's some beautiful little matchmaking stories in there, which also reveals a lot about ancient culture. Some of it's going to seem a little bit weird. That's a bit of a weird way to hook up, right? but just enjoy that. I guess all I'm saying is just enjoy that. Remember, Genesis is a book of origins. It's the origin story ultimately or mainly about God's relationship with his people, this covenant family, and how the Israelite nation emerged. And again, that's the main thing from a chronological perspective I really want you to pick up this week. The establishment, here we go, of those 4 generations. The God who is leading us out of Egypt and into the promised land. The God who is speaking to us and guiding us through this great prophet Moses. Okay, who is this God? Well, he is the God of our forefathers. Abram, Isaac, Jacob, and the boys. He is the God of generations. He is the God of covenant family. All right, bless you guys. Have a great reading this week as you read through those 21 chapters. Pretty well, I would suggest reading it in 4 blocks of about 5 chapters each. It kind of divides up the logic of the story nicely if you're doing that, about 5 chapters at a time, but I'll leave that to you. Enjoy your week, and remember, keep chatting on our community groups. Okay, bye.